We're discussing pilgrimage across Britain on today's episode of the Sacred Steps podcast.
Walking virtually along the world's most revered footpaths and connecting the global community of pilgrims. It's the Sacred Steps podcast, available on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Broadcasting from the Shaymare Studios in Florida, here's your host, pilgrim, backpacker, and author, Kevin Donahue.
Buen Camino, pilgrims, and welcome back to the Sacred Steps podcast. I'm Kevin Donahue. On today's episode, we're walking virtually alongside Dr. Guy Hayward from London, England. Guy co-founded the British Pilgriamge Trust to help return the English tradition of pilgrimage and make holy places more accessible. The Trust recently published its first book, Britain's Pilgrim Places, featuring breathtaking photography and background on 500 holy sites and shrines across all of the UK. To celebrate our second season of the podcast, I'll be gifting a copy of this book to one of our subscribers. So jump over to our website at sacredstepsbook.com/promo to register. It's a wonderful book highlighting so many pilgrimage destinations. I actually got this book as a gift from my wife, and it's been just a fascinating read for me as someone who plans to walk in England soon. It's also a great companion for this second season of the podcast, as we have 4 or 5 episodes featuring pilgrims from the UK and Ireland, including a great episode coming up next with English fiction author and unexpected pilgrim Joe Francis Penn. So I'm glad to gift a copy of the book to one of our subscribers. Register at sacredstepsbook.com/promo now before September 30th, 2021. I'll put that link down in the show notes so you can find it later, along with all of the links from today's discussions with Dr. Guy Hayward. Before we begin, I want to thank you so much for your comments and feedback, especially your comments on our new YouTube Camino 101 video series. If you're considering your first pilgrimage walk on the Camino de Santiago, you'll find a dozen or more 5-minute videos answering the most basic Camino questions. That's over on our Sacred Steps YouTube channel. We also share video links on our Facebook page and our Instagram accounts, so follow those channels for more updates. Lastly, let me say thank you so much for your support of the podcast. We are now streaming to nearly 40 countries on 6 continents. I started this podcast to feel more connected to my global pilgrim family, and I am so grateful to be walking virtually alongside each of you. Thank you for subscribing to the Sacred Steps podcast on your app and on our video stream at YouTube so that our upcoming episodes are available to you automatically. Okay, on with the program, Season 2. Wow, so excited to launch this. We're discussing pilgrimage across Britain on today's episode of the Sacred Steps podcast. Dr. Guy Hayward, thank you so much for joining us on the Sacred Steps podcast.
Oh, thanks. Well, it's really great to meet you, Kevin.
I want to start with a little background on the British Pilgriamge Trust. As a co-founder, obviously you saw something happening in our society around pilgrimage. What was the impetus and goal of starting the British Pilgriamge Trust?
Well, I actually saw nothing happening around pilgrimage, and that was one of the reasons I really felt that we needed to get moving on that. I was doing a walk, and we called it a walk then, not a pilgrimage, from Elam, which was my co-founder Will Parsons' home in Kent, and then we walked along the River Medway, singing a song, the Heart Lake Bridge Tragedy, to everyone we met, and then taking it back to where the song came from, which was Heart Lake Bridge and where this tragedy happened. And when we got to the parish churchyard, there was a monument dedicated to all of the poor souls who died in this tragedy, which was a drowning of hop pickers' carts into the river. And we met a couple by the monument, and they happened to be there, and in that sort of short 5-minute period when we'd been walking for 70 miles in a whole week with this kind of quite clear intention, a kind of clear narrative. And then we met them. We said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "We tried to find this place 10 years ago, and now we found it. We didn't find it then, but we're only here for another 5 minutes." Gosh. So are you related to this tragedy in any way, this monument? And they said, "Well, 3 of my ancestors died in the tragedy." And we were like, "Gosh, that's something else." And then we said, "Have you heard the song?" And they hadn't heard the song, so we got to return the song that we'd been singing along the way to these people. Now, at this point, we were just walking and sleeping outside and making campfires and bathing in the rivers and foraging a bit and all this kind of magical primal stuff. But then we were also started to enter the churches, because neither of us were particularly religious, or we had complicated relationships with the church. And so, but then suddenly these places, these medieval churches along the route, became particularly special because they were places of community, of sanctuary, and so we were kind of softened, or the barrier between us and them was softened. And then we had this moment with these people, and then we thought, that is too much of a coincidence for us to ignore the fact that we spent this whole journey, taking this song back to where it came from. And not only have we taken it back to the place, but we've taken it back to the bloodline. And I think then we thought, what's going on here? There's this narrative journeying seems to be lost in our culture. Where is it? People go on hikes, they go on walks, they go on lots of different things. But to use the word pilgrimage is something that I don't think they often do. And then we looked into the history of Britain, and we realized that the Reformation had destroyed pilgrimage. Thomas Cromwell had banned it in 1538. So there we were, and suddenly we've got this blank slate, and we were able to create a whole new pilgrimage tradition. And that seems to have been what's happened, and people are really open to interpreting what pilgrimage means in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, you have set up the website so that those that are interested in short walks and even some longer walks can find opportunities in their areas throughout Britain, England, Scotland, and Wales. And I've actually used the website to download some GPS routes, which is fantastic for those who are interested in making a walk. Whether you're a person of faith or no faith whatsoever, you make holy sites accessible through the British Pilgrimage Trust. Yeah.
Well, ultimately, any kind of serious pilgrimage network of information has to be practical. There's all the spiritual stuff, and then there's the nature aspect. There's the folklore, and there's all of the kind of things that make it magical. But there's also the actual practical thing of, how do I get my feet on this route and make sure I turn right at the correct point, and the style, and turn left at this point, and the actual practicalities. It's very grounded activity.
You've gone through, and you mentioned you were a walker a bit before. Is that what drew you to this project and really starting out making these routes more accessible for others?
Actually, no, not really. I wasn't really a walker. It was the first walk I'd done like that, actually, the one I mentioned. And as a child, I didn't really like walking, so and I hadn't really done much of it. So I wouldn't say that is what drew me. I think, in a way, the realization that walking could become narrative based, and the kind of magic of that, the way that it turns it into a quest rather than just a walk, like for scenery and nice things, and like exercise and looking at trees and animals and things, which is great too. But ultimately, it was more. I realized there was this rich tradition that could give so much and sort of nourish you in so many different levels. That's what drew me to it. It wasn't just a walk.
It's interesting to me because for almost 1,000 years, the tradition of British pilgrimage was wiped out in the Reformation from Cromwell and is just starting to come back. With the British Pilgrimage Trust, you're working to make these routes open to all and to make these walks more accessible for everyone. Can you share maybe a little bit about your mission there?
Well, so in Britain, I don't know what it's like in America, but we have 44% of our population identify as Christian, and 46%, which is a bigger proportion, identify as having no religion. Now, these could be spiritual but not religious, or they could be atheist, but ultimately there are these two big groups of people. And even the ones that identify as Christian may not always see eye to eye with the church and things, and they will have different ideas as to what it all means. So we realized that if we're going to create a pilgrimage tradition that actually works for the modern day, we're going to have to open it up and to start talking of pilgrimage as a practice rather than a belief system, and a practice that welcomes lots and lots of different ways of engaging with it. As you know, there are as many reasons for doing pilgrimage as there are pilgrims.
That's a great point. The Pilgrimage Trust has recently, and congratulations, in the past year, published a book, Britain's Pilgrim Places. I received it as a gift, so I'm showing you my copy here.
Yeah.
It's a gift from my wife because I have a great passion for walking. And the only route that I was truly familiar with as an American was the Pilgrim's Way to Canterbury. And I got this book, and you and the trust, the British Pilgrimage Trust have opened up an entire encyclopedia of holy places and routes through this new book. I think you've outlined 500 or so holy places in the book. And I'm so curious as to, A, what was the impetus for creating such a beautiful work for the pilgrims?
Well, my co-author, Nick Mayhew Smith, spent 14 summers developing all of the 500, 600 holy places themselves, taking photographs, getting in touch with each of the places, learning the history, and then writing them up. So a huge project, 300,000 words or something like that. And I think this book had been published 10 years ago, but under the title of Britain's Holiest Places. And Will and I, when we started the Pilgrimage Trust, used this book a lot to find inspiration, and it often made us see places in a different way, and actually started to talk about how to tell the stories of places. And I think it does that really well. So, but I noticed it had gone out of print and for quite a few years. And so I got in touch with Nick, and then he said, look, why don't we completely update it, go through every site. He checked the Google Earth to see whether the trees had changed, and complete updating.
Right.
And then, but he also said we need to weave pilgrimage through all of this. So now each of them have a little purple bit of prose that's trying to connect the place to a route and the pilgrimage tradition in general. And then he said, let's make all these routes that you have on your website. You write all of the summaries of all these routes. So it was a job that I just suddenly realized, God, this is going to be the way to really, really, for me to understand what it is that's out there in Britain. And it meant getting in touch with all of these route creators around Britain. I mean, this is the thing. Whilst the British Pilgrimage Trust is perhaps a kind of focus point for collecting all this information together, there's a lot of grassroots activity happening everywhere. And you can see that across Europe as well. And I think America too is going to start finding all of these old paths that are connecting natural places, and finding a new way of journeying also, because you don't necessarily need just the routes. You can actually journey in this new way with intention and stuff. And Australia, they'll find ways of connecting with the Aboriginals, I'm sure, to find this deep connection with pilgrimage sites. So I think there's going to be this grassroots swell of connecting back to land, connecting back to the earth. I mean, we talk about it all the time in terms of protecting the planet, conserving our resources, but actually that feeling of relationship and closeness to the earth and place itself, the concept of place, I think is really starting to wake up within the human psyche.
Nick's photography in this book, obviously the cathedrals are extraordinary, but there is a wealth of photography that highlights not only the routes, but also just some holy sites, wells and caves and hermitages that would otherwise maybe be lost along a route. You've highlighted them here. I love that there are QR codes that connect me to the GPS tracks, so that I can obviously get that on my phone. But I'm wondering if you have a couple of routes from the book that you could share with our audience that you may want to touch on briefly for us today.
Well, perhaps I should choose two routes that I don't actually know myself. I haven't actually walked, because obviously the thousands and thousands of miles of these routes, there's no way I could have walked it all. But in doing the research, I want to do it myself. The North Wales Pilgrim's Way, I just think is going to be an astonishing route. From the Holy Well in Flintshire, which is North Wales, basically looks like a swimming pool, but it's basically a swimming pool full of holy water in this magical St. Boyno's stone altar underneath the water, which you can kneel on. And then you walk through sort of woodland, dale, over hills, coastline, and then you eventually have to get on this little ferry over to Bardsey Island, which is known as the Isle of 20,000 Saints. So that the biggest population on that island is underground, because there are only 4 people living there permanently now, and it's very hard to get to. And also some people call it the other Avalon. Glastonbury is an Avalon where Arthur was buried, King Arthur, but they also think he may have been buried on Bardsey Island. So that's one of the routes. I'd say that's going to be a classic. And for the other one, I'd really like to go up to Orkney, because there's this incredible prehistoric tradition there with stone circles and amazing sort of ancient villages that have long been abandoned. And then there's this Christian angle too, with the St. Magnus story, and his cousin killed him, and it's all very sort of gruesome and Viking-like and stuff. And so, and the sort of open skies and the wildlife and the wild weather, and I just love that primal experience. But to be honest, Britain is just so varied in all its landscapes and the different kinds of people. I mean, people change from county to county, and the accents change, and the kinds of churches change, the kinds of holy wells, the way that Cornwall's totally different to the east, and the east is totally different to Northumberland. And it's just, there's so much richness in all of the different layers of what pilgrimage is. And I could spend the rest of my life just engaging in my own home country.
I love that you've taken time to outline some key routes, because many of these, I noticed the contrast between the British Pilgrimage Trust website, where there are 1 and 2 day walks. Many of the routes in Britain's Pilgrim Place outline multi-day walks, so 3 and 4 day walks. So if you're coming from the EU to the UK, coming from the States to the UK, these are pilgrimage walks that you can add to your collective vacation time in Britain. So you go see the theater, you go to the museums, but then you really get the richness of the countryside and the people through Britain's Pilgrim Place walks that you've outlined here. I'm so interested. I wasn't aware, and so I've started tagging some of my future walks in here. But I love the contributions that you've made through here. So I'm looking forward to going to. You'll have to help me pronounce it, because my American tongue gets in the way, guys. So Little Walsingham.
Walsingham, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, so I got it right. So I was reading all about, because I was not that familiar with the Silver Slipper and the church up there. So I'm very interested in making pilgrimage there. Now, as a pilgrim guide, this is a great point of inspiration, but still need to connect, because infrastructure in Britain continues to be developed. We've seen walks in Spain where the government helped fund 20 years ago the hostel network. Yeah. But here in Britain, there are many opportunities for walkers to stay in the historic inns and pubs as those start to open up post-COVID, and also some homes that people are taking pilgrims into. I'm wondering if this book and the work of the British Pilgrimage Trust will start to inspire more multi-day journeys and make these routes even more accessible to walkers.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, the joy of immersing yourself in the landscape for days on end, being outdoors for days on end, does give your body more chance to completely change and become almost like more of an animal and more human than it's ever been before. And I think in order to do that, you need to sleep overnight and to really really be in the place. There's something always, like when you go to someone's house, if you sleep overnight, it changes your connection to that place, and you feel like you really are a guest. And so these churches along the route, along the old way, we've got the Sanctuary Church project, where pilgrims can call the church wardens and vicars in advance and sleep overnight, with their sleeping bag and roll mat. I mean, pretty basic, to be honest, but at the same time, a very deep, profound experience, as well as being basic. So even people who are used to 5-star accommodation may want to have a slightly different way of sleeping. And then, of course, you've got village halls, the church halls. Often they're not used. Like villages have changed so much. Local communities function in a different way now. So we need to give new uses to these places, and pilgrims sleeping in them would be brilliant. All over the country, this could work as a concept once we've got it really up and running along the old way. And then you've got the other option of all these disused farm buildings, these rustic buildings, which are kind of falling down. And it's not really in a farmer's interest to develop them. And then developers might want to come in and use them for like commercial property. But what about, the government subsidizing farmers to turn these disused farm buildings into pilgrim hostels, so that you can promote tourism, which is a new kind, a kind of one that really immerses you in the landscape and makes you feel connected. And I think there's a long way to go. And you could say it's the lucky villages and the lucky churches that happen to be on a pilgrimage route, because you've still got thousands and thousands of other villages and churches that will not be on the route. But you've got to start somewhere, and we are trying to do that. And hopefully a vast network will eventually exist.
Well, and that's the beauty of pilgrimage, right? Because while everyone may be making their way to Lindisfarne, or making their way to Ramsgate, or making their way to Canterbury and different landmark destinations, they're all coming different routes. So if you're coming from the north, you may be going through a different village than someone who's making their way from the west. And so that does open up the opportunity in that sort of project for everyone. So hopefully that's something that comes through. In the meantime, you can always call the vicar and sleep on the patio and see what might be available for you as you're making your way through. I want to note, because a large bit of the proceeds from this book, Britain's Pilgrim Place, go to support the British Pilgrimage Trust. So if you're at your local bookshop, or you're going on to even Amazon, you can help support the British Pilgrimage Trust just by purchasing this book, right?
Yeah. Well, this book it's helped us establish ourselves as a charity that is providing high quality information all over Britain. This idea that it's everywhere, and this takes money, and then also it funds our bigger visions of sanctuary and our ability to function as a kind of hub for all the different pilgrimage route creators in Britain, so that we can support all of them and just grow this tradition in an organic way, but with also some kind of guiding force, but allowing people to also do it in their own way, so we can really have a kind of biodiversity of what pilgrimage means. It's not just the BPT controlling everything, and it's a very sort of interesting kind of fungal network of connectivity. But all of this requires money, and it's a wonderful vision, and it will continue to grow. But yeah, purchase the book. Also become a friend of the BPT, and then we can access the Old Way online guide as well, which is another project we've been working on. And also the Sanctuary project itself, because we have 13 churches signed up, so you get access to them too.
That's fantastic. Our guest today is Dr. Guy Hayward, co-founder of the British Pilgrimage Trust. We're discussing the book Britain's Pilgrim Places, as well as the mission of the British Pilgrimage Trust. I want to look ahead a little bit, and let's play a little bit of crystal ball here. 5 years from now, where do you see the role of the BPT, and what's the vision as you sort of look out into the future for developing the British Pilgrimage Trust?
Well, I think we have 4 major goals, which is to improve the infrastructure of pilgrimage, as we've been talking about, to improve the community of both all the pilgrims wanting to connect with pilgrimage who haven't yet done it yet, and then also the community of those on the ground who are providing services and connection and meeting points in the villages and the towns and the cities with pilgrims. So you've got the infrastructure community. We want to improve our communication so that we are really opening up the concept of pilgrimage and making it as rich and as diverse as possible, and whilst retaining its kind of core of being a transformational journey. And then finally, we want to get people to actually walk it. That all of our digital stuff, it's great for giving information and getting people enticed, but actually, until their feet are on the ground, until they are touching the ground, until they're looking at the sky, they're hearing the birds, they haven't fully made that transition to be a pilgrim. And so we want to help engagement as much as possible.
We're all sort of thinking about what our next steps might be and looking forward to the day where we can safely make them and be with others. Guy, how about you? There's a lot of these walks that you haven't had the opportunity to do. You mentioned 2 of them, but short term, near term, what are your next steps, whether it's pilgrimage or working to help support the foundation?
Well, I've been cooped up in my home, just like anyone else, for the last year. But I've really enjoyed this sort of digital exploration period. A pilgrimage of the internet, really, to try to understand everyone I'm trying to promote for everyone else, and that's been a real joy. I mean, surprisingly, because I do like being out there, but I think it's going to be I'll re-engage with actually walking and being outside and traveling and meeting these communities too. I suppose the way I'll re-engage with pilgrimage at large outside of the 4 walls of my home after COVID is to go and take people on guided pilgrimages again, these organized group pilgrimages that we do, and then also to start working with and partnering with communities and institutions and organizations around Britain, like tourist boards, maybe of particular counties that don't yet have a pilgrimage route in them. And then I can maybe work with them to create a pilgrimage route in their county and to start to connect the special places of their place. And this is all going to be made possible by actually going and meeting them and walking with them.
For almost 2,000 years, people have been walking sacred routes throughout Britain. The new book, Britain's Pilgrim Places, highlights some of those that are more accessible today than ever, thanks to the work of the British Pilgrimage Trust and Dr. Guy Hayward. In the brief time we have left, I just want to encourage everyone to grab this book in your local bookstore and shops, on Amazon and the other sites that make it accessible. It's been a great gift to me to really engage with the history of some of these sites and learn from the more than 500 that are outlined here. As a special gift to our audience, I will be giving away a copy of Britain's Pilgrim Places. So if you're on our email list, please be sure to send in and click for that. If you're not yet on our email list, please subscribe, and we'll be donating an extra copy of Britain's Pilgrim Places to our followers on the Sacred Steps podcast. Dr. Guy Hayward, in the brief time that we have left, what's your message going forward for those who are hearing this maybe for the first time and seeing the door start to open to exploring Britain? Mm-hmm.
I suppose it is that we want every household in Britain to think of pilgrimage as a normal activity, so that they can connect with purpose and get out walking. It's getting out walking with purpose and between holy places, I think, is our vision. It's the idea that if you say to someone at the weekend, what are you doing at the weekend? Mm-hmm. Instead of saying going to a party or something, they say, I'm going on a pilgrimage. And that's that people don't bat an eyelid and they think, oh, fair enough. And they sort of understand it. Whereas at the moment, it'd be seen as a slightly more sad about, what's going on there. The idea there's just a greater awareness of the fact it is open to all and that it's something that is actually worth doing.
Whether it's a walk of faith or a walk for purpose, the routes outlined here in Britain's Pilgrim Places open up an entire community throughout England, Scotland, and Wales. Dr. Guy Hayward, I want to thank you for coming on the Sacred Steps podcast and being our guest today. I look forward to maybe the day where I'm joining you on one of those guided walks. And I thank you so much for opening so much more of the UK to me than just the Pilgrim's Way, because there is a rich pilgrimage history in Britain, and I cannot wait to be there next.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great interview. Thank you.
This has been the Sacred Steps Podcast. Visit sacredstepspodcast.com for episode notes, links, or to contact Kevin. Watch us online on YouTube. We read every comment. Please add your review and feedback. Before you go, tap subscribe to have episodes added to your playlist. Until next time, buen camino.